Humans astonish the Galactic Council by rejecting negotiation. Part 2. The Refusal. Arbiter Yulan blinked her wide silver eyes 3 times in a row. In all her years of service, through hundreds of disputes between dozens of species, she had never heard those words spoken in this chamber. She tilted her head slightly, the way Aloxi did when they were trying to process something that did not fit into any pattern they understood. "I am sorry, Admiral," she said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" Nathan Cole did not shift in his seat. He did not look away. He kept his eyes fixed on the Arbiter and spoke in the same calm, steady voice. "We are not here to negotiate. The Dralith Dominion invaded 3 of our colony worlds without warning and without cause. They killed over 14,000 of our civilians, men, women, and children. They bombed hospitals. They burned farming villages. They destroyed schools with students still inside. There is nothing to negotiate." The gallery above erupted in whispers. Hundreds of alien representatives turned to each other, their translators buzzing with confused chatter. Some shook their heads. Some made sounds of disbelief. A few simply stared down at the human admiral, with wide, unblinking eyes, as though they were watching a creature do something no one thought was possible. High Warlord Tazrek leaned back in his enormous chair, and the rumbling sound came from his chest again. This time, it was clearly a laugh, a slow, deep, mocking laugh. "The little humans are putting on a show," Tazrek said, his forked tongue sliding out between his teeth. "How sweet. You lost some territory. It happens to everyone sooner or later. This is how the galaxy works. The strong take, the weak complain, and then we all sit here and pretend that the outcome is fair." He spread his clawed hands wide. "So stop wasting everyone's time. Make your demands. We will reject most of them. You will accept what we offer, and then we can all go home." Nathan did not respond to Tazrek. Instead, he looked at Lisa Herrera and gave a small nod. Lisa reached into the case she had brought with her and pulled out a datapad. She placed it flat on the white stone table and pressed a button. A holographic display flickered to life above the pad, filling the space between the 2 delegations with images and video. The first image showed a farming colony on Haven 3. Green fields stretched out under a pale yellow sky. Small homes and storage buildings sat in neat rows along a dirt road. Children played near a water fountain in the center of the settlement. The next image showed the same settlement after the Dralith arrived. The homes were burned to black skeletons. Bodies lay in the dirt, some of them so small that every being in the chamber understood immediately what they were looking at. Then the video began to play. It was shaky footage, recorded from a low angle, clearly captured by a personal device held by someone small, a child. The camera showed Dralith soldiers moving through the settlement, dragging people from their homes. The sounds were terrible. Screaming, pleading, the sharp crack of energy weapons. A woman's voice calling out a name over and over again before it was cut short. The footage lasted 43 seconds before it went dark. Lisa Herrera's voice was quiet but clear. This recording was recovered from the personal device of a 9-year-old boy named Peter Dawson. He hid under the floor of his family's home and recorded what he saw through a gap in the boards. Dralith soldiers found him 20 minutes after this recording ended. He did not survive. Even the whispers in the gallery had stopped. Some of the alien representatives had turned away from the holographic display. Others sat frozen, their expressions unreadable. Tazrek looked at the images for a moment, and then waved one of his clawed hands dismissively, as if brushing away an insect. "Casualties of expansion," he said. "Every empire has them. Every great civilization has stepped on smaller ones to grow. Your own species did the same on your homeworld, did it not? Do not pretend to be innocent." Nathan Cole stood up. He did it slowly, pushing his chair back from the table, rising to his full height. He was not as tall as Tazrek. He was not as physically imposing as any of the Draelith in the room, but something about the way he stood, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands remained perfectly still at his sides, made every being in that chamber pay attention. "You are right about one thing, Warlord," Nathan said. "Our species has a dark history. We have done terrible things to each other. We have fought wars that killed millions. We have committed acts that we are still ashamed of, centuries later." He paused and let those words settle. "But we learned from those acts. We built laws to prevent them from happening again. We created courts to punish those who committed them. And we made a promise to ourselves, a promise written into the very foundation of our civilization, that we would never again stand by and allow the helpless to be slaughtered while we sat at a table and called it diplomacy." He looked at Arbiter Yulan. "Arbiter, I have great respect for this council and for what it has tried to build. But I will not sit across from the people who murdered our children and bargain over how many of our worlds they get to keep as a reward. That is not peace. That is surrender. And humanity does not surrender its people." Yulan's hands were trembling slightly. She clasped them together in her lap to hide it. "Admiral Cole," she said, and her voice had lost some of its calm, "I must inform you that refusing council arbitration carries severe consequences. Your species will be formally censured. Trade agreements with council members may be suspended or revoked. You will lose access to shared resources, shipping lanes, and diplomatic protections. You will, in effect, stand alone against whatever comes next." Karen Bishop, who had been silent until now, leaned forward slightly. She had studied the council's rules for 20 years. She knew exactly what Yulan was saying, and she knew exactly what it meant. It meant that humanity would be cut off from the rest of the galaxy. No allies, no support, no safety net. She looked at Nathan. He did not look back at her. He did not need to. They had already discussed this. They had already made their decision. All of them had, together, in a quiet room aboard the Resolute, before they ever set foot on this station. Nathan looked at Yulan one last time. "Arbiter," he said, "humanity has stood alone before. We will manage." He turned to his delegation. "We are leaving." Lisa Herrera closed the datapad and placed it back in her case. Danny Sutton pushed his chair in neatly, a small, almost polite gesture that somehow made the moment feel even more final. Karen Bishop rose and straightened her jacket, her face calm, but her eyes bright with something that might have been fear or might have been pride. The four of them walked toward the chamber doors. Their footsteps echoed against the polished stone floor, steady and unhurried. They did not look back. Behind them, Tazrek slammed his fist on the table hard enough to crack the white stone surface. "You are making a mistake, human," he snarled. "You cannot fight us. You do not have the strength. You will crawl back to this table begging for whatever scraps we are willing to leave you." Nathan Cole stopped at the door. He did not turn around. He spoke over his shoulder, and his voice carried clearly across the silent chamber. "We will not be crawling anywhere, Warlord. And if you come for our people again, you will learn exactly what kind of strength we have." The doors closed behind them. For a long moment, no one in the chamber moved. Then slowly, the gallery exploded into noise. Representatives shouted at each other. Some demanded immediate sanctions against humanity. Others demanded an investigation into the footage the humans had shown. A few sat in stunned silence, staring at the cracked stone table where Tazrek's fist had landed. Arbiter Yulan sat very still in her chair, her silver eyes fixed on the closed doors through which the humans had disappeared. In 600 mediations, she had never lost control of a session. She had never watched a species simply walk away. She had the strangest feeling that the galaxy had just changed, and that none of them yet understood how much. Humans astonish the Galactic Council by rejecting negotiation. Part 3. The Galaxy Watches. The news traveled faster than light, Within hours of the human delegation walking out of the negotiation chamber, every inhabited system in the galaxy knew what had happened. Communication networks burned with the story. News channels on 1,000 different worlds played the same footage over and over again. The human admiral standing up from the table, the images from the colonies, the 6 words that no species had ever spoken before the Galactic Council. We are not here to negotiate. On the council floor at Valthus Prime, emergency sessions were called one after another. Diplomats who had not spoken to each other in decades suddenly found themselves in heated arguments. The entire framework of galactic civilization had been built on the idea that every problem could be solved through talking. If one species could simply refuse to participate, what did that mean for everyone else? What did it mean for the next dispute and the one after that? Ambassador Prellis of the Umari Collective was one of the first to address the full assembly. The Umari were soft, gelatinous beings who changed color based on their emotions. Prellis was normally a calm shade of blue, but today he shimmered between orange and deep purple, colors that meant distress and fear. In 12,000 years, Prellis said, his voice quivering through the translator, no species has ever refused arbitration, not once. The humans have broken the most sacred rule of this council, and if we allow it to stand, if we do nothing, then every aggressive species in the galaxy will see this as permission to do the same. We must sanction the humans immediately, and with the full weight of this body. Many in the chamber agreed. The Tuluxi delegation, an insectoid species that valued order above all things, clicked their mandibles in loud approval. The Garathi, massive stone-skinned beings who had not fought a war in 8,000 years, rumbled their agreement. Sanctions, isolation, cut the humans off from trade, from resources, from everything, until they came back to the table and behaved like a civilized species. But not everyone felt the same way. Ambassador Ketone of the Verasi stood from his perch in the upper gallery. The Verasi were a bird-like species with bright feathers and sharp, intelligent eyes. They were known for asking uncomfortable questions, and Ketone was the most uncomfortable of them all. Before we rush to punish the humans, Ketone said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, perhaps we should ask ourselves a simple question. Why did they refuse? The chamber quieted slightly. I have reviewed the evidence that Commander Herrera presented, Ketone continued. I have watched the footage from Haven 3. I have read the reports from the other 2 colonies. What the Dralith Dominion did to those worlds was not expansion, it was not conquest. It was the systematic murder of unarmed civilians, including children. And this council's response was to invite the victims and the killers to sit at the same table and find a compromise. He paused and looked around the chamber. Can any of you honestly say that you would have done differently if it had been your people? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several delegations shifted in their seats. A few looked away. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, the human delegation was already far from Valthus Prime, and moving fast. The great carrier ship cut through space at maximum speed, heading for the Outer Rim and the 3 colony worlds that were still under Dralith occupation. In the main briefing room, Nathan Cole sat at the head of a long metal table, surrounded by his senior officers. The room was simple and plain, nothing like the grand chamber they had just left. Gray walls, harsh lighting, and the constant low hum of the ship's engines. This was where real decisions were made. Lisa Herrera stood at the front of the room, a large tactical display glowing behind her. She had already pulled together every piece of intelligence the fleet had gathered over the past 3 months. The Dralith Forward Fleet is stationed at the Karish Nebula, approximately 9 light hours from the Haven system, she said, pointing to a cluster of red dots on the display. Our best estimates put their strength at 36 capital ships, over 200 support craft, and roughly 40,000 ground troops spread across the 3 occupied colonies. She tapped the display, and a second set of dots appeared. These ones blue. We have 12 carriers, including the Resolute, 40 destroyers, the 2nd and 5th Marine Divisions, totaling about 22,000 ground troops, and the orbital defense platforms. Danny Sutton looked up from his notes. The platforms are operational? All 12 of them, Lisa confirmed. We seeded them on the colony moon 6 months ago, disguised as mining equipment. The Draelith never even looked at them. Karen Bishop, who had been quiet since they left the station, leaned forward in her chair. Her face was pale, and her hands were clasped tightly together on the table. You planned for this, she said, looking at Nathan. Before we ever went to that chamber, you knew we were going to walk out. You knew we were going to fight. Nathan met her eyes. He did not look away, and he did not soften his expression. Dr. Bishop, the Draelith have been pushing toward our border for 3 years. We sent 17 formal protests to the Council. 17. Every single one was filed under review and buried. We asked for observers to be sent to the border. The request was denied. We asked for a preemptive arbitration hearing. It was delayed 4 times. He paused. The Council did not fail because of what happened today. It failed a long time ago. We just stopped pretending otherwise. Karen stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. She was a diplomat at heart. She believed in talking, in finding common ground, in the power of words. But she had also seen the footage from Haven 3. She had seen the body of 9-year-old Peter Dawson in the official casualty report. And she understood, even if it broke something inside her, that some things could not be solved with words. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to prepare a legal case, Nathan said. When this is over, there will be trials. I want every Draelith officer involved in the massacres identified, documented, and charged under our laws. I want the evidence so strong that no council tribunal can dismiss it. Karen nodded. I will have it ready. Nathan turned to Danny. Captain, you will lead the forward assault group. I want your frigates positioned to strike the moment the Draelith fleet enters the Haven system. Danny did not hesitate. Yes, sir. Lisa brought up the final piece of the tactical plan. We have one major advantage. The Draelith fight in rigid formations. They always have. Their fleet doctrine has not changed in over 200 years, because it has never needed to. They are bigger, stronger, and more heavily armed than almost anyone they has ever faced, so they simply line up, push forward, and crush whatever is in front of them. She looked around the table. We are not going to stand in front of them. We are going to move around them, behind them, and through them. We are going to hit them from every direction at once, and never give them a fixed target. We are going to fight the way our ancestors did, the way wolves hunt. Back on Vaelthus Prime, High Warlord Tazrek was holding his own war council aboard his flagship, the Burning Claw. He paced back and forth in front of his officers, his heavy tail sweeping behind him, his red eyes blazing with anger. The humans are fools, he snarled. They have signed their own death warrant. We outnumber them 3-1. We outgun them. Our ships are larger, our weapons more powerful. This will be over in hours. His senior strategist, a scarred old warrior named Voskren, sat quietly in the corner. He had lost one eye in a border skirmish decades ago, and the empty socket was covered by a metal plate. He had spent the last 2 weeks studying every piece of information the Dominion had on human military history, and what he had found kept him awake at night. Warlord, Voskren said carefully, I would advise caution. The humans have a saying on their homeworld. They say that it is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters. It is the size of the fight in the dog. Tazrek stopped pacing and turned his burning gaze on the old strategist. What is a dog? He asked. Voskren considered how to explain it. It is a small predator that their species kept as a companion. They bred it from wolves. which are pack hunters known for bringing down prey many times their own size. Tazrek snorted, a blast of hot air from his nostrils. "We are not prey." Voskren said nothing, but in the silence of his own mind, he was not so sure. Humans astonish the Galactic Council by rejecting negotiation. Part 4. The Battle of Haven. The Dralith fleet came out of hyperspace like a wall of iron and fire. 36 capital ships, each one the size of a small city, emerged from the swirling blue light of the jump point and immediately began forming into their standard battle line. Behind them came the support craft, over 200 destroyers, frigates, and troop transports, spreading out like the wings of some enormous bird of prey. The formation was perfect. It was textbook. It was exactly what every species in the galaxy expected the Dralith to do. Tazrek stood on the command bridge of the Burning Claw, his clawed hands gripping the railing in front of him. The main display showed the Haven system spread out before them, 3 small colony worlds orbiting a young yellow star. Somewhere among those worlds was the human fleet, and Tazrek intended to crush it so completely that the name humanity would become a warning to every other small species that thought about standing up to the Dominion. "Scan for their fleet," Tazrek ordered. His sensor officer, a young Dralith with smooth, unblemished scales, worked the controls for a long moment. Then he looked up with confusion in his eyes. "Warlord, I am reading only 12 large signatures. Carrier-class vessels. They are positioned in a defensive arc between the 2nd and 3rd colony worlds." Tazrek hissed with pleasure. 12 carriers? That is all they brought? They are even more foolish than I thought. "Where are their escorts? Their destroyers?" The sensor officer shook his head. "I cannot find them, Warlord. There are some scattered readings near the colony moons, but they are faint and inconsistent. It could be debris or mining equipment." Voskren, standing in his usual place at the back of the bridge, felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. 12 carriers sitting in the open, practically begging to be attacked. No visible escorts. Scattered readings near the moons that could be anything. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. "Warlord," Voskren said quietly, "I recommend we send a scouting force ahead before committing the full fleet." Tazrek turned his head and fixed the old strategist with a look of contempt. "You want me to show caution against 12 ships? The galaxy is watching, Voskren. Every species in the Council will see this battle. I will not let them see the Dralith Dominion creeping forward like frightened prey." He turned back to the display. "All ships, full advance. Standard assault formation. Destroy the carriers first. Then we take the colonies." The Dralith fleet surged forward, engines burning bright against the darkness of space. It was an impressive sight. Hundreds of warships moving in perfect coordination, their weapons powering up, their shields glowing with faint energy fields. Any other species in the galaxy would have looked at that wall of firepower and surrendered. On the bridge of the Resolute, Nathan Cole watched them come. The main display showed the Dralith fleet as a mass of red dots, moving steadily toward the human carriers. Lisa Herrera stood at the tactical station beside him, her eyes moving between multiple screens of data. "They took the bait," she said. "Danny, are you in position?" Danny Sutton's voice came through the communication system, calm and clear, despite the fact that he was sitting in the command chair of a frigate that was currently hiding in the shadow of one of Haven 3's moons, surrounded by 39 other human destroyers and assault frigates, all of them running on minimal power to avoid detection. "All wolf packs are in position, Admiral. Ready on your word." Nathan looked at the approaching Dralith fleet one more time. They were committed now. Their entire force was moving in a straight line toward the carriers, exactly as Lisa had predicted they would. The Dralith did not change their tactics because they had never needed to. They were bigger and stronger than everyone else, so they simply attacked head-on and overwhelmed their enemies through sheer force. but they had never fought humans before. "All carriers, begin Phase 1, Nathan said. The 12 human carriers, which had been sitting still in their defensive arc, suddenly began to move. But they did not charge forward to meet the Drelith. Instead, they split apart, each carrier moving in a different direction, spreading out across the system like seeds scattered by the wind. As they moved, they launched wave after wave of strike craft, small, fast, single-pilot fighters that poured out of the carrier bays in streams of blue engine light. Hundreds of them, filling the space between the two fleets like a swarm of angry insects. Tazrek watched the strike craft on his display and laughed. Fighters? They sent tiny fighters against capital ships? Destroy them. Massive plasma batteries, designed to tear apart ships many times the size of a human fighter, lit up the void with blinding flashes of green energy. But the human fighters were small and incredibly fast. They jinked and rolled through the plasma fire, dodging shots that were aimed at targets 10 times their size. For every fighter that was hit, 20 more slipped through the gaps and dove straight into the Drelith formation. They did not aim for the hulls of the capital ships. They aimed for the engines, for the sensor arrays, for the shield generators mounted on the outer hulls. Each fighter carried only a small payload, but they delivered it with point-point accuracy, disabling system after system on ship after ship. "They are blinding us," Voskren said, his voice tight with alarm. "Warlord, they are taking out our sensors and our engines. They are trying to slow us down and cut off our ability to see." Before Tazrek could respond, the second phase of the human plan began. Danny Sutton's wolf packs emerged from behind the colony moons like ghosts. 40 destroyers and assault frigates, running dark until the last possible moment, suddenly lit their engines and slammed into the flanks of the Drelith formation at full speed. They did not form lines. They did not approach in neat rows. They came in from every angle, in groups of 3 and 4, each group targeting a single Drelith ship and hitting it from multiple directions at once. The Drelith formation, which had been so perfect and orderly moments ago, began to fall apart. Ships on the flanks turned to face the new threat, but in doing so, they broke away from the center. Gaps appeared in the battle line. The human wolf packs dove into those gaps immediately, like water pouring through cracks in a dam. Tazrek roared with fury. "Hold the line. Hold formation." But it was too late. The human fighters had blinded half his fleet's sensors. His ships could not see what was coming until it was already on top of them. The wolf packs were too fast and too unpredictable. Every time the Drelith turned to face one group, another group hit them from behind. Then the orbital defense platforms activated. The 12 platforms that the humans had hidden on the colony moons months ago powered up all at once. They were not small. Each one carried weapons designed to defend an entire planet. Heavy beam weapons that could cut through capital ship armor like a blade through cloth. They opened fire on the rear of the Drelith formation, catching the troop transports and support ships in a crossfire they never saw coming. Tazrek watched his fleet being torn apart from 3 directions, and felt something he had never felt before in his life. It was not anger. It was fear. Danny Sutton led his squadron of frigates directly into the heart of the Drelith formation. It was the most dangerous part of the battle. His ship took hits that shook the entire hull and blew out 2 of his weapon systems. But he kept going, pushing through the chaos until his squadron reached the burning claw itself. "Target the command ship's shield generators," Danny said, his voice still calm, still steady. "All frigates, concentrate fire." 6 frigates opened fire on the burning claw at once. The massive warship's shields flickered, flared, and then collapsed. Secondary explosions rippled across the hull. Alarms screamed throughout the bridge. Tazrek staggered as his ship shook under him. He looked at the tactical display and saw that nearly half his fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The rest were scattered, fighting in small, desperate groups against enemies they could barely see. "Warlord," Voskren said from the back of the bridge, his voice heavy, "we must retreat. If we stay, we lose everything." Tazrek stood in silence for a long moment, his clawed hands trembling with rage. Then he gave the order he had never given before in his entire career. "All ships, fall back. Retreat to the Koresh Nebula." What remained of the Drelith fleet turned and ran. The human ships did not pursue. They held their positions around the colony worlds and watched the enemy disappear into the darkness of space. On the bridge of the Resolute, Nathan Cole watched the last Drelith ship vanish from the display. The bridge crew was silent. There was no cheering, no celebration. They had won, but the cost had been real. Human ships had been destroyed. The battle was over, but the weight of it sat heavy on every person in that room. Nathan turned away from the display. "Get rescue teams to those colonies," he said quietly. "Find our people. Bring them home. Humans astonish the Galactic Council by rejecting negotiation." Part 5. A New Understanding. The news of what happened at Haven spread across the galaxy even faster than the news of the walkout had. Every species, on every world, heard the same unbelievable story. The humans had not only refused to negotiate, they had fought the Drelith Dominion and won. A species that had been part of the galactic community for less than a century had broken the most powerful military fleet in the Outer Rim in a single battle. On Veilthus Prime, the reaction was a mixture of shock, fear, and something else that many species did not quite know how to name. It was the uncomfortable feeling of watching someone do the thing you always wished you had the courage to do yourself. The Drelith Dominion was in chaos. Their fleet had limped back to the Koresh Nebula, with barely half its ships still functioning. Tazrek had been stripped of his rank by the Dominion's ruling council before his damaged flagship even finished docking. He was placed under guard aboard a holding station, waiting for whatever came next. The other Drelith warlords were already fighting among themselves, blaming each other for the disaster, trying to distance themselves from Tazrek's decisions. Within a week, the Dominion did something that shocked the galaxy almost as much as the battle itself. They sent a ceasefire request directly to the United Earth Confederation, bypassing the Galactic Council entirely. It was the first time in the Dominion's long history that they had asked anyone for peace. Nathan Cole received the message aboard the Resolute, which was now stationed in orbit above Haven 3. The colony below was still scarred. Burned buildings, empty fields, mass graves that the rescue teams had marked with simple white stones. Over 3,000 people had been found hiding in basements, caves, and underground shelters. They were thin and frightened, and some of them flinched at every loud noise, but they were alive. Nathan read the Drelith ceasefire request in his cabin, alone. Then he called his senior staff together. "They want peace," he said simply, placing the message on the table. Lisa Herrera picked it up and read it. Her expression did not change. "They want to stop losing. That is not the same thing." "No," Nathan agreed. "It is not, but it is a start." Karen Bishop, who had spent the past week compiling the most detailed legal case she had ever built, spoke up. "What are your conditions?" Nathan had already decided. He had decided before the battle, before the walkout, before any of it. He had decided the moment he read the first casualty report from Haven 3 and saw the names and ages of the dead. "One condition," he said. "Every Drelith officer involved in the attacks on our colonies will be surrendered to face trial under human law. Every single one. Starting with Tazrek." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "They will not like that." "They do not have to like it," Nathan said. "They just have to do it." The Dominion resisted at first, Surrendering their own officers to an alien species for trial was humiliating beyond anything they had experienced. But their fleet was broken, their economy was strained, and the rest of the galaxy was watching. If they refused, the humans might come for them, and this time, the humans might not stop at defense. 3 weeks after the Battle of Haven, a Drelith transport ship arrived at Haven 3, carrying 27 officers in restraints. Tazrek was among them. He said nothing as he was led off the transport. His red eyes stared straight ahead, and his scales had faded from their glossy black to a dull gray, the Drelith sign of deep shame. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy. Karen Bishop led the prosecution, presenting evidence so thorough and so devastating that even species who had initially sided with the Drelith could not deny what had happened. Testimony from survivors, medical reports, the recording from Peter Dawson's device, the burned remains of schools and hospitals, document after document, image after image, building a case that left no room for doubt. Tazrek was found guilty of ordering the massacre of civilians and was sentenced to imprisonment for the rest of his natural life. The other officers received similar sentences. There were no executions. The humans did not believe in killing prisoners, even prisoners who had killed their children. That fact, more than anything else, made the galaxy pay attention. On Valethis Prime, the Galactic Council convened an extraordinary session. It was the largest gathering in living memory. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Delegations that had not attended a session in decades were present. The air in the great chamber hummed with tension and anticipation. Arbiter Yulan called the session to order. She looked different from the last time she had stood before this assembly. Older, thinner, there were shadows under her silver eyes that had not been there before. The events of the past weeks had shaken her deeply, not because the humans had been violent, but because they had been right. The events at Haven have forced this council to face a truth that we have been avoiding for a very long time, Yulan said, her voice steady but heavy. For 12,000 years, we have told ourselves that negotiation is always the answer. That, sitting at a table and talking, is always better than any other option. She paused and looked across the chamber at the hundreds of faces watching her. We told ourselves this because it was comfortable, because it allowed us to feel civilized, because it meant that we never had to make hard choices or take real risks. But in our devotion to compromise, we forgot something important. We forgot that there are acts so terrible that they do not deserve a seat at the table. We forgot that asking victims to share a room with their tormentors and find a middle ground is not justice. It is cruelty dressed up in polite language. The chamber was so quiet that the soft clicking of the Tluxi delegation's mandibles sounded like thunder. Ambassador Keaton of the Verasi rose from his perch. I move that the Council formally recognize the right of any member species to refuse arbitration in cases where verified atrocities have been committed against their civilian population. No species should be forced to negotiate away the lives of their dead. The vote took less than an hour. It was not unanimous. The Umari abstained. The Gorathi voted against it. But the majority was overwhelming. The motion passed, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the rules of the Galactic Council changed. 3 months after the Battle of Haven, Nathan Cole returned to Valethis Prime. But this time, he did not come as a soldier. He came as Earth's newly appointed ambassador to the Galactic Council. He walked into the same chamber where he had refused to negotiate. But instead of his dark blue military uniform, he wore a simple gray civilian suit. His service medals were gone. His boots had been replaced by ordinary shoes. He looked like a different man, but his eyes were exactly the same. Lisa Herrera walked beside him as his chief advisor. She had accepted the role reluctantly, telling Nathan that she was a strategist, not a diplomat. He had smiled and told her that in his experience, Those were the same thing. Danny Sutton had been promoted to the rank of admiral and given command of the Outer Rim Defense Fleet. He was the youngest officer to ever hold the position, and when the announcement was made, every crew member in the fleet stood and saluted, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Karen Bishop had returned to Earth, where she was leading a team of legal experts in drafting new frameworks for interstellar law. The trials of the Drelith officers had exposed enormous gaps in how the galaxy handled crimes against civilians. And Karen was determined to fill every one of them. Nathan took his seat at the council table. Around him sat representatives from dozens of species. Some of them had voted to sanction humanity just weeks ago. Some had called humans primitive and dangerous. But now, they looked at him differently. There was respect in their eyes, and something else, something that looked very much like hope. Arbiter Yulan approached him before the session began. She stood before him for a moment without speaking, her thin hands clasped in front of her. "Ambassador Cole," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When you walked out of this chamber, I believed you were making the greatest mistake your species had ever made. I believed you were throwing away everything humanity had worked for." Nathan looked at her. "And now?" Yulan's thin lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Now I believe you were the first species in 12,000 years to tell this council a truth it desperately needed to hear. That peace without justice is not peace at all. It is just silence." Nathan nodded slowly. He thought about the people of Haven 3. He thought about the 3,000 survivors who were slowly rebuilding their homes. He thought about the 14,000 who would never come back. He thought about Peter Dawson, a 9-year-old boy who had been brave enough to press record when the world was falling apart around him. "We did not come to the stars looking for enemies," Nathan said. "We came because we are curious, because we wanted to see what was out there, because we hoped that the universe would be full of wonders." He paused. "But we also came knowing who we are, and we are a people who protect our own, not because we are stronger than everyone else, not because we think we are better, but because we made a promise, a long time ago, that we would never again look away when the helpless are suffering." He straightened in his chair and faced the council table. "We are ready to work with this council, to build something better than what came before, to help create a galaxy where no species has to choose between its principles and its survival." Yulan nodded and returned to her podium. The session began, and for the first time, a human voice was part of the conversation, not as a newcomer begging for acceptance, but as an equal who had earned the right to be heard. Far away, on the rebuilt colony of Haven 3, a young girl stood in a green field that had been burned to ash just months before. New crops were growing. The soil was dark and rich. The sky above was pale yellow, just as it had always been, and the stars were coming out one by one as the sun went down. She did not know about the council session. She did not know about the votes, or the speeches, or the new laws being written in distant chambers. She only knew that her home had been destroyed, and that people had come to help her rebuild it. People in dark blue uniforms, who carried tools instead of weapons, and who knelt down to her level and spoke to her softly and told her that she was safe now. She looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. She did not feel afraid. And across the galaxy, in chambers and council rooms and quiet corners of 1,000 different worlds, beings of every shape and size thought about what the humans had done. Some admired them, some feared them, some could not decide. But all of them understood one thing. The galaxy had changed, and it was never going back to the way it was before. Humans astonish the Galactic Council by rejecting negotiation. Part 1. The Summons. The Galactic Council had kept peace across the stars for nearly 12,000 years. It was made up of over 400 different alien species, each one with its own worlds, its own fleets, and its own ways of life. But they all agreed on one thing. Every problem, every fight, every disagreement between species was to be solved through talking, through negotiation, through compromise. War, they believed, was something only primitive creatures did. Civilized beings sat at a table and worked things out. That was the rule, and no one had ever broken it. So when the Dralith Dominion, a powerful reptilian empire known for taking whatever it wanted, invaded 3 human colony worlds on the outer rim of the galaxy, the Council did what it always did. It sent messages to both sides, and told them to come to the great neutral station called Valethus Prime. There, in the grand negotiation chamber, they would sit across from each other, talk about what happened, and find a middle ground. That was how it had always worked. The strong took something, the weak complained, and in the end, both sides walked away with less than they wanted, but more than nothing. The Council expected this time to be no different. Humans were still a young species in the galactic community. They had only been part of the Council for about 80 years. They were small, they were new, and everyone assumed they would do what every other small new species had done before them. They would accept whatever scraps the Council offered and be grateful for it. The human delegation arrived aboard a massive carrier vessel called the Resolute. It was not a pretty ship. It was not graceful or elegant like the shimmering cruisers the Aloxi flew, or the living bioships of the Omari Collective. It was covered in thick armor plates and lined with rows of weapon systems that made the docking officers at Valethus Prime very nervous. It looked like a ship that had been built for one purpose, and one purpose only, and that purpose was not diplomacy. The airlock opened, and 4 humans stepped onto the station. At the front was Admiral Nathan Cole. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with short gray hair and deep lines carved into his face from years of service. He walked with the slow, steady confidence of someone who had made hard decisions his entire life, and had learned to live with every single one of them. His uniform was dark blue, pressed and clean, with rows of service medals across his chest that most aliens could not read, but somehow understood. Beside him walked Commander Lisa Herrera, his chief strategist. She was smaller than Nathan, but carried herself with a sharpness that made people pay attention. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and her brown eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the station around her. She had a reputation in the fleet for being the smartest person in any room she entered, and for being completely ruthless when it came to protecting her people. Behind them came Captain Danny Sutton, a younger officer in his early 30s, with sandy blonde hair and a calm, quiet way about him. He did not speak much, but when he did, people listened. He was one of the best tactical officers in the entire human fleet, and Nathan had personally chosen him for this mission. The last member of the group was Dr. Karen Bishop, a civilian advisor who specialized in alien politics. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and graying red hair, and she had spent the last 20 years studying how the Council worked. She understood its laws, its customs, and its weaknesses better than almost anyone alive. She also understood, better than most, that the Council system was not as fair as it pretended to be. The 4 of them walked through the long, curved corridors of Valethus Prime in silence. Alien species of every shape and size stopped to watch them pass. Some whispered to each other. Some stared openly. Humans were still a curiosity to most of the galaxy. They were soft-skinned, short-lived, and physically unremarkable compared to many other species. But there was something about the way these 4 walked, something in their eyes, that made the watching aliens feel uneasy, without quite knowing why. The negotiation chamber was enormous. It was a circular room with a high domed ceiling made of transparent crystal that showed the stars outside. In the center was a long table made of polished white stone, surrounded by chairs designed to fit dozens of different body types. Above the main floor was a gallery, where representatives from other species could watch the proceedings. Today, the gallery was nearly full. Everyone wanted to see how the young human species would handle its first major crisis before the council. The Dralith delegation was already seated when the humans arrived. High Warlord Tazrek sat at the head of his side of the table. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with thick black scales that gleamed under the chamber lights. His eyes were deep red, and they tracked the humans with the lazy interest of a predator watching something too small to be worth chasing. His clawed hands rested on the table, each finger tipped with a curved talon that could tear through metal. Behind him sat 4 Dralith advisors, all of them scarred veterans of the Dominion's many conquests. Tazrek watched Nathan Cole sit down across from him and let out a low, rumbling sound from deep in his chest. It might have been a laugh. Presiding over the session was Arbiter Yulan, a senior member of the Ioloxy species. She was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large silver eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the chamber's light. She had mediated over 600 disputes in her long career. She had never failed to reach a resolution. Not once. Yulan activated the translation systems and addressed the room. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the weight of centuries of tradition. We are gathered here today to resolve the territorial dispute between the Dralith Dominion and the United Earth Confederation, she said. Both parties will present their claims, both parties will hear each other, and both parties will reach a compromise. This is the way of the Council. This is how peace is maintained. She looked at Nathan Cole with a polite, expectant expression. She was waiting for him to begin his complaint, to list his grievances, to ask for what he wanted, so that the long, careful process of give and take could begin. Nathan Cole looked back at her. He did not open a file. He did not pull out notes. He did not begin listing demands. Instead, he said 6 words that no one in that chamber, no one in the entire history of the Galactic Council, had ever said before. We are not here to negotiate. The silence that followed was so complete that every being in the gallery could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Yulan stared at him. Tazrek's red eyes narrowed. The advisors on both sides of the table froze. And in that single moment, everything the Galactic Council had believed for 12,000 years began to crack.